It is October 30th, 2025, and I'm Hanson Sue back with Andy Hertzfeld.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
And so we left off, where we left off is we wanted to start with the beginnings of Radius.
Okay.
And so talk about starting Radius and tell us who your partners were.
Yeah. Well, Radius was really the brainchild of Burrell Smith, the hardware digital designer for the Macintosh. And Burrell sort of got fed up with when the Mac came out of people saying it's unexpandable. There's, it's the Mac was too puny to do all different kinds of work. And Burrell thought, well, no, it's not. I'll show the world how to expand it. Burrell was one of my best friends. We were living next door to each other, so he just kind of pushed me into it. But I did something on the Radius project that I'm pretty proud of. It goes along with Burrell pushed me to that too, which was where we were adding a large screen to the Macintosh, which was sort of a no-brainer that the Mac was beginning to be used in desktop publishing, and it was crying out for a full-page display. So one of the issues is if you just add the big display, the little display that's built into the Macintosh is just sitting there doing basically nothing. That offended Burrell's sensibilities, kind of the WAS ethos of using every spare little chip to give you a clever feature. So he kept sort of bothering me. Can't we figure out a way to use the second display? And finally, just in a flash of insight, it came to me that it wouldn't be that hard to put both screens in the same coordinate space. And then when you just kind of drag your mouse over to the right, it'll just instantly appear on the other screen. And that was just a really fun thing to show people because people hadn't seen anything like that in the past. It went on to become, it's now a standard feature. I laugh because Microsoft added it to Windows. It took them 11 years after Radius to get it. But now, it's actually, I helped Apple once we got it going. Apple saw what we did and said, yeah, we better have that built into the Mac for everybody. And Ernie Biernick was the name of the fellow at Apple who was doing the next generation graphics for the Mac, the Macintosh 2. And he came over and I had to decide, there are a few little subtle things you had to do to maintain compatibility with the apps who were expecting the small screen. I had to decide, should I help Apple do this, or is it in Radius's interest? I decided it was, because whatever Apple does will become the dominant way of doing things. And so if I could influence Apple to do it the way that Radius was already doing it, that would just pay off for the user, pay off for everyone. But Burrell didn't feel the same way. He wanted the competitive advantage for Radius when it was just starting out. It was, just a tiny little thing. Although we had great founders, all the founders came from the Mac group at Apple, and we had a great team doing it. But anyway, we did some other pretty cool things, because we knew the system as well as anybody. And so we put in all kinds of smaller enhancements to make the big screen excellent for the Macintosh. And I'm pretty sure we did the right thing. If we hadn't helped Apple, they would have done it a different way, probably just as good, but a way that's not compatible with Radius. And no matter what we did, Apple was going to go ahead and do something. So I think it was the right decision to do it that way. The product came out. It was big success right from the very beginning. The third generation one was the high point of it, which they called it the Radius Pivot. This was after I had moved away from them, but the idea is it has a little accelerometer in it, and you can swivel it so it can be in landscape mode or portrait mode, which was very useful for people, and that was a cool feature. Eventually, Radius ran aground, though. For one thing, Burrell got into a dispute with his partners, and without Burrell, it just wasn't the same. I refused to. I was what was they called a founding shareholder in Radius because I wasn't an employee at the time. I had, just gone off on my own, and there were lots of things I wanted to do for the Mac. I just couldn't see myself tying myself to the needs of one little startup. But I was the second person after Burrell to work on it, and I had about 10% of the company's stock. So founding shareholder is what I was. Later on, I had a project, I may as well talk about it now, which I would come into Radius once every week or two to see what's going on, to see if I could help. And one of the programmers that we hired, one of the very first ones, a guy named Ted Cohen, had just gotten a Mac too. Well, we were working initially on Radius, and he noticed that the 8-bit graphics in the Macintosh 2 were really, really slow. Just easy to see, maybe half as fast as they could or should have been. And so I thought, well, let's investigate it. I had my own technique back in those days of finding the inner loops of things. Just hit the interrupt key, have it do the thing you want to measure, have it hit the interrupt key, and it'll statistically it'll be stopped in the place that it's using the most. And so I did that and started looking at the code. And as I looked, I said, oh my God, they had to support, the Mac 2 had to support a 1-bit per pixel mode, a 2-bit per pixel, 3-bit per pixel, and 4-bit per pixel, although no one's ever going to use the 2 or 3 bits per pixel. It's really either black and white, or if you were going to, you'd want the 8 bits per pixel, for full color experience. Anyway, I started looking at the code, and they used the 68020, which is what this project was for. The 020 had these new instructions that weren't in the 68000 called bit field instructions, where you can make it bit addressable. And while that's really kind of cool for ease of programming, it's horrible for the speed of the graphics. So I saw, boy, to just plot one thing, it's taking you have to fetch it in memory, muddle with it in the registers, and store it back, and for each pixel. So really what you want to do is hit memory with the full width of the data bus, so you have minimum memory fetches. And so just fixing that made it 3 times faster. Now it was a little bit difficult to explain, because a few of the routines, like if the screen was all black or all white, Apple already was doing it as fast as they can, because clearing the screen, I guess, it was obvious. You just make it all black, not very subtle. But for if you were trying to plot a different color, it would use these bit field instructions that were 3 times slower than they should have been. So I got pretty excited and went home and started fiddling with it. Turns out it was kind of hard. There's a hard part to try to do what I was even attempting to do, which is the quick draws in ROM, and you're not going to be able to change it. But just to play around with it, the first thing I did was I just moved it all into RAM. patched a few places that were dependent on the address. And that kind of worked, but was not something you could make as a product because you're just wasting memory and stuff. But then as I was disassembling, figuring out what's going on, I saw they had a jump table for all the inner loops. Every inner loop was at first, it was designed to be patchable. I didn't know this. I wasn't working at Apple at the time. But when I saw that it was designed to be patchable, would support an extension in a clean way, I thought, boy, this could be great for the Mac too. To make it 3 times faster is a tremendous thing. So I went and did it, and when I had it done, I started showing it to people, and it was pretty obvious to me that it should just be part of the Mac. But I had gotten burned by a previous. I've been selling. This was before General Magic, but after the Mac, I was basically working on my own. I helped start Radius, but I was doing other projects as well. And let's see, I'm losing my train of thought. But what I again quarreling a little bit with Burrell, who wanted to keep it just for Radius. I knew that if it was just for Radius, so there's a lot of smart people out there. They'd dissect what I did, and everyone would have a slightly different implementation of it, which was not a good thing. So I wanted to get it to Apple, but it seemed I didn't want to just give it to them. We needed some kind of business thing, and I was a little bit suspicious of the management of Apple. In particular, Jean-Louis Gasset didn't really like the original Mac team, and he was, I didn't know what to do until finally Jerome Koonin, who was the software manager, I asked him, well, what's the maximum you're allowed to sign for so no one else would have to sign off on it? He said $10,000. I said, oh, fine. And we got it. And then Bruce Leak, who's a tremendous programmer who went on to found a company called Rocket Science, and then after that Web TV, was the guy assigned to doing the 8-bit graphic, maintaining the 8-bit graphics. So it fell to him, and I worked with him, and we were able to get it integrated into System 6 of the Macintosh in just record time. We started with less than a month before it had to go out, and we got the speed of the graphics tripled. So I was proud of that one.
So what time frame was that?
This was the very end of 1988, I think. I remember it was Christmas vacation when I was working on it.
And then the extended desktop. When was that?
Oh,
done?
Sorry. Radius was started in mid-1986, so it was right around then. By the end of 1986, we were shipping the product, I think. Right.
Yeah. No, so I think the world has to thank you for that feature because, extended, it was such, for the longest time, it was such a differentiator on the Mac.
Yes.
And it's such an obvious idea, you would think, right?
Yeah, and it was a fun, the two-screen thing was a fun implementation as well. One thing to remember is I did not have any source code, so I had to just do it all with the disassembler. And then there were ways, as I worked on it, they came up with that I could figure out how to make it smaller and smaller because things are symmetric. And so if you really didn't have to handle each thing separately. So it was clean. Actually, a great programmer named Peter Barrett was just a kid from Australia when he did this, but he had just arrived in the States, and then he was hired by a company called Supermac, who had to say, well, Radius has this, we got to copy it. And he took apart the code, and years later, almost 10 years later, he complimented me at how beautiful it was on the inside. And then I was doing some other projects in between those. We had already talked about Switcher. I had decided I should do the next generation of Switcher. I did a thing I called Servant that had multiple windows. The Switcher, you could only see one application at a time. It had this fun animation for transitioning between them, but basically what the obvious next step is multiple windows of different applications up there at once. I had my way of doing it. I got it working. I was able to sell it to Apple for a decent amount of money, but there was some reluctance on Apple's part, and in particular, some of the engineers didn't like the idea of me meddling essentially in their work, and so I thought I learned a lesson from that, which is I should work on the stuff that's appropriate. I was confused about whether I was sort of working for Apple or not in doing these things, and I decided, well, if I'm not working, I shouldn't do what the Mac needs the most. I should do what the Mac needs the most that is feasible for a third party. And I after the Servant experience, where basically I succeeded in a way, but Apple didn't want to use it. It was just shelved, even though they had paid me $150,000 for it. Because of the tensions there, it just wasn't getting used. And I thought, well, just stay away from the Mac system stuff. It's a big world out there. I could still write all kinds of things for the Mac, but just not what the system programmer should do. But then I almost immediately, my next project, this quicker draw that we were describing, speeding up the thing, just kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't planning on doing it. It was less than a month's work on it, but it was exactly the thing I promised myself I wouldn't do yet. Right in the heart of the system. But somehow it was good. It worked out that way. It was almost a healing experience. And when I went on post-Radius, I didn't do stuff for the Mac anymore because, it wasn't the best use of my time anymore, not to be hassling. Anyway, that's the story of Quicker Draw.
So interesting, because it's almost like you still hadn't gotten that mentality out of the mentality that you were actually further developing the Mac system software. Yes. So you were doing all these things that you were trying to do for the Mac platform, but outside of Apple, which made it difficult to do.
Yeah. Yes.
And especially since, doing it as a third party, it was like there was a conflict of interest between, making money for Radius and doing it for the interest of Radius. That's versus right. Doing it for the interest of Apple, which you weren't working for anymore.
Yes. I resolved my issue with Burrell by promising to do something that required graphics acceleration that required hardware, because then you don't have that compatibility thing. The software is designed just for your hardware. There was something else I wanted to say that I forgot.
So were you involved in the sort of the initial business plan of Radius and coming up with that?
Yeah. It was just Burrell, my next door neighbor, and then when I started working on it, Burrell just pushed me into working at it, and then I had dinner with my friend Mike Boich, who was the first Mac evangelist. He, not Guy Kawasaki, is the person who coined that term, evangelist, for advocate for a platform. But we knew there wasn't that much. It's not a clever idea. The cleverness is in implementing it. But should you be able to add a big screen to a Mac? Well, of course. But then, starting a company is a whole different thing than doing a project. And we were able to attract key people who worked in the Mac division. So we had a great little team, I think maybe 5 people starting. And then I wasn't involved at all, though. I was involved in the sort of business planning from a technical level, but not in like raising money. I had to just show my face in the meetings with the venture capitalists and ended up getting funded by Kleiner Perkins, which was probably one of the best VC firms, at least at the time. And so it all went smoothly, everything with Radius, until, Burrell sort of got in conflict with some of the new people hired, and it all sort of crumbled eventually, but it had quite a few good years. It had an IPO in 1990.
And it eventually merged with SuperMac, is that correct?
Yeah, that was when the Mac 2 had sort of decimated their business. And Radius made a fatal mistake. It was still doing very well, selling not only the screens, I didn't mention it, but the second Radius product was something that was sort of what was the accelerator. The 68020 had just came out. It runs 4 times faster than the 68,000. So it's kind of obvious that you want to be able to upgrade a Mac with the 020. But what was not obvious, the sort of no-brainer way of doing it is you just essentially make another little Macintosh board that clamps on to the thing. But all of the RAM you were using was on a board because that makes it all easy. It's self-contained. But Burrell is smarter than, or more clever, let's say, than most people. He wanted to make it both faster and smaller than you could do in that way. So what he did was he implemented a cache. It's just using the system memory, but it's got a cache to make it run just as fast as if it had its own memory, effectively. Maybe just a notch or two slower. What that did, making the cache, it made it very clean hardware-wise, but the software, there are speed dependencies in the software, unidentified. You don't even know what they are. I mean, for example, like Woz's disk drive technology is utterly dependent on the speed of the processor.
The disk drive.
Yeah. But, all over the system, there were little places where if you did it faster than it was expected, it would break. There'd be a race condition or something like that. So Burrell had to, on that project, I was the one who had to go chase down these, bugs caused by it running too fast. There was a basic general technique you could use, which is, if it was an I/O thing, just turn off, don't stop using the accelerator on the speed-sensitive parts. And since there aren't that many of them, you're not losing that much performance. So I had to go chase those down. And then Burrell, who's kind of a wacky guy, but in the morning, I'd hear a knock on my door, and Burrell would say, I need your help. It's not working here. So I chase it down. But he knew I was a little, miffed at being at his beck and call there. So the next one he had, I opened my door, and Burrell was on his knees there, saying, "Help, help!" But that was also a very successful product. The accelerator had a little more competition, I think, than the screen, just because it's easier, I guess. But
Yeah, that was a pretty substantial CPU upgrade.
Yeah, the
accelerator
biggest,
marker,
the biggest one of all the ones they had, that was the biggest, 68,000 to the 020.
That first jump, yeah.
Yep.
So, were you working? It sounds like you were working at Radius full time, but also doing your own projects.
Yeah,
or-
just a little full time when it was necessary, but it usually wasn't. I did a lot of work at the very beginning of it, and then it was just maintaining it. And of course, Radius started hiring other programmers. I wasn't needed after the first year so much. And meanwhile, I was doing my servant thing, which was ill-fated. It never really hit the market. And then after that, I started a project called Frox. I guess, I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but actually I was just, because of the 50th Apple anniversary coming up next year, the media is already working on various things, like you're helping David Pogue with his book. Again, I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry.
You'd mentioned Frox.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get to
that.
that.
Yeah. Okay. That brought it back. I was interviewed by a German television network that's making a big documentary of Apple, and I don't know why I'm being so flaky, but I can't even remember what I was trying to say.
So they're interviewing you about what time period?
Yeah, just the birth of the Macintosh.
Right.
Even before then, in Apple II days, they're doing a documentary encompassing all of Apple.
So what's the connection to Frox or to Radius or that they're interested in, or that you're?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Can forget it.
So wait, what do you think of the legacy of Radius?
It showed that, I think it gave a boost to the desktop publishing. That turned out to be the center of demand for the early Macs, and having both the big screen and the accelerator made the Mac a more suitable machine for its main use case. So that was important. And then it showed the rest of the little Mac industry that, hey, you're not imprisoned by just what came in the box. It's possible, other companies did copy Radius's main technique invented by Burrell of using essentially a clamp over the CPU to get all the signals of the built-in one. And other ones, like Levco, I think, was the first little company to be inspired by Radius in that way.
That was for like the CPU accelerators.
Yes.
Yeah.
For a while, I remember the name of the guy doing that there, Dwayne Maxwell. We had some back and forth while he was developing
it. So you mentioned Frox. So talk about that.
Yeah, that was my first main. Let's get off the Mac platform. I had a nice time with it, but now it's time to forge ahead. I was actually recruited to work on it by Steve Jobs, which is sort of interesting. Hartmut Esslinger was the main person behind. He'd be a great person for you to interview. He's a sort of industrial design genius. Steve became enamored of his work and hired him not to do the Mac, because that had already, all that was committed, but to do the Apple IIc was the first product that Hartmut did for Apple. Did a few others, and he does really nice stuff. But one day I got a call from Steve saying he wanted to introduce me to Hartmut. Hartmut had this idea that consumer electronics is converging with, sort of the business world. Let's tackled home entertainment, and let's build an uncompromising, quality first TV set, essentially, or TV set stereo system. And I love music. My whole career, I've been fiddling with music stuff. At one point at my house, I had these Sony professional CD changers. This was in the early 90s, where a box about 4 or 5 feet tall had 400 CDs in it. I had 2 of them, so I had 800 CDs online. It was my own little Spotify 20 years prior. It's hard, Steve knew that music, stereo equipment stuff, that would be like catnip to me. He introduced me to Hartmut. I was pretty excited about it. It turns out after about 2 months, Hartmut and Steve had a falling out over it, because Hartmut really thought the main point of it was to use digital signal processing to make it as high quality as possible. But that made the price go north of $5,000. And Steve thought this would be great at $1,000, but no way would it succeed at $5,000. So he left the project. I think he expected me to quit after that, but I loved what Hartmut was doing so much that I stayed on with it. And we put together a small team. Andy Bechtelstein was involved, friend of Hartmut's, co-founder of Sun. He got us on the Spark chip, which was not even on the market yet when we made the decision to go with it. I was a little bit skeptical of, just because it was more expensive than we needed, but it was a fun thing to develop. We were first in that area. No one was using a decently powered thing for music applications like that. So we got to do things that later became what everyone's doing. I thought it was very, very important to put the album covers on the screen, which, of course, nowadays you do that. But that was not an easy thing to achieve. Because we had no internet, basically. Right. But
so there was a computer inside the system, or what?
The system was a computer. Basically, it had speakers that were separate from the main box, but essentially, and then you could plug, like serial buses to plug in other things. But it was a computer essentially, but not marketed as such. But then I guess what ended up happening is Hartmut, design genius, was not such a good businessman, and he put together two teams: the technical team in Silicon Valley that I was a part of, but then also there was a business team in Germany who we only met once or twice, but there were venture capitalists who raised money. And I knew that there was something wrong when they spent a decent portion of their venture capital on buying cars for the executive team. I thought, wait a second, that's not the right way to do things. And sure enough, we had bad investors, and they got at odds with Hartmut, and essentially they fired Hartmut from his project. And so I left when I was on Hartmut's side, basically, and just that was just a month before General Magic started out.
So that was what year did you work on?
89.
89. It's really interesting. So Steve was interested in this project even while he was running
at
Next.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, interesting. And he had already acquired Pixar by that point as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think Pixar maybe he acquired in 86.
So he had like his hands in multiple companies at the same time.
Yeah, well, he was just really on that. He was just being a matchmaker. He wasn't well, yeah, I'm giving Hartmut advice about it, but no commitment. He was not an investor. He was doing both me and Hartmut a favor, I guess, really, because he knew I would love working on something like that.
So the machine itself was a computer, but it was also a stereo system?
Yes. Yeah, well, we also had a little team we hired from the Stanford music thing.
Karma?
Yeah, Karma in its earlier stages, but they had all of the best digital audio people, not all of them, but there's a guy named Andy Moore, I think, who was pretty well known. I can't remember all the names, but 4 or 5 people doing the digital signal processing to make the greatest stereo ever. That was the idea.
Oh, that's cool.
And I still have what I wrote some software that was pretty out there for it because my idea was to make it extremely customizable by people and use some drag and drop techniques. It was pretty cool for its day.
So it had like a full
Yeah,
GUI
we had to invent our own pointing device for it, which we never quite got working. We probably would have if the project had continued. But another fairly well-known person was working on that, Jaron Lanier. This was before he started doing VR stuff. I knew Jaron for a few years. I had done a few other things with him, but basically the pointing device that we imagined and was trying to make is what everyone has now, which is, we called it a magic wand, but it just, from the angle you put it on, it had an accelerometer, it would know, where to move the cursor. So you just picked it up and used it with just one button. Remote, pretty far ahead of its time, maybe perhaps a little too far ahead.
So it was on the remote control?
Yeah, the remote that came with it. And anyway, I was about to say the one relic of Frox that I still have is a videotape of me demoing it circa January 1990. So it's on YouTube. So you could look it up if you want and see what Frox is.
Well, I'll check that out. Okay, so you mentioned right after that you jumped into General Magic. Can you talk about how that happened?
Yeah. Well, my best friend, not my best friend, but one of my best friends, and clearly my mentor at Apple was Bill Atkinson, who sadly died of pancreatic cancer just a few months ago. I'm still recovering from it myself because Bill was great and I owed him a lot in my career. I had left Apple 6 years prior to General Magic starting. Bill stayed there to do HyperCard, which was another tremendous achievement. But I longed for working with Bill again. And just after Frox kind of had fallen apart for me, it kept going as a project, but they had fired Hartmut. I wasn't really involved anymore. But I got a phone call. I was planning on perhaps doing another thing with Burrell, but I was between projects. Got a call from Bill saying, "I saw the best. You got to come back to Apple and work with me on this. This is the best thing. It's the future." And so I said, "Sure." My main motivation being getting to work with Bill again, but. Just the day after I talked to Bill on the phone, Marc Porat came by with his plaster models. Marc had started at Apple a year before, charged with figuring out what comes after personal computers. That was his charter. Marc interviewed many different people inside Apple or not, came up with the consensus idea. The next thing beyond the Mac is a computer that's in your pocket, always with you. And man, that was very right on. And so General Magic started just with this idea that we're going to make a personal intelligent communicator, we called it. And the idea was these little postcards, which you can create just by scribbling on the device, will drop out of the sky into your pocket. Now, this was before email. The email standards were all there. It was before ordinary people could use email. So that was pretty innovative and out there for its day. But I thought it would be great to work with Bill. This project sounds sensational, much better than anything I could come up with on my own. But I didn't want to work at Apple because I didn't respect Apple's management at the time. And Apple, was visibly drifting away from the values that I loved. So I thought, I don't want to be an Apple employee again. But the way things developed was because what we were doing was consumer electronics, essentially. And Apple didn't want to be in the consumer electronics business at the time, so they spun it off. And as soon as I was part of the spin-off, so I'm a co-founder, just myself, Bill, and Marc Porat. And we got this company with a brilliant mission, invent the future of consumer computing. And so I was excited. I remember just when I was starting, you start a project like that, where do you start? And I just remember scribbling on a whiteboard for hours at a time, just not any kind of solutions, but all the different problems we had to solve. And then we began recruiting others to help us. And I guess because of Bill's reputation, or Bill and my reputation, we were able to attract the best of the best working at Apple, and we put together an awesome team. Marc was a very good salesperson, and he would not like that to call him a salesperson, but he kind of had a silver tongue, because a little bit like Steve Jobs could convince people of practically anything. So we had this great little team going, a great project. Marc was able to get the dream team of investors. The initial General Magic was conceived of four companies working closely together, or maybe it's just three. There was Apple, covering the ease of use software, Sony, the premier consumer electronics company that had values closely aligned with us. They wanted to make things that were beautiful. Motorola was the other one whose expertise, they were unrivaled in wireless communications. So we had investors covering all of the key things for us, the ease of use, ease of use, consumer electronics, and the channel for selling consumer electronics and wireless communications. Each of them put in founding shares, and we were off and running. I think sort of a mistake that we made was Marc was so good at attracting these large companies. Oh, and by the way, Marc was able to convince all three of those companies to take board seats in General Magic, because he wanted it to be truly a collaboration of those companies. So I was on a board of directors with the CEO of Sony, the CEO of Motorola, and the CEO of Apple, which was a tiny little company having all of those. The downside of that was our board meetings were like theater. These guys, their time is so valuable. We had to put on a little show for them every quarter. But that was I think, fairly well conceived with those companies. But Marc kept selling it to, by the time we made our public announcement, I think we had 14 corporate partners like that. And the problem is Sony loved us, but once Matsushita, their sort of blood enemy, joined. Well, maybe they didn't like us so much anymore. And so it became an incredibly difficult balancing act to balance the interests of these different competitors. That was one reason why General Magic didn't make it, I think, because of the conflict of interest of, we no longer had, we called it the alliance, the companies trying to make this thing happen. And with the 4 companies, the alliance was a good thing once it got with all their competitors and up almost a dozen companies, maybe not so good.
Right. Just a consortium is not the best.
I think we wrote some really innovative and good software for it. Yeah, I could probably do a whole interview on the mistakes of General Magic, but it was kind of at its peak there. It was the most exciting thing I ever worked on, even more exciting than the Mac, for the promise it had. And now, here we are in 2025. It's easy to look back on that and think we were making the iPhone of the 1990s, 12 years before the iPhone hit the market, something like that. But nowadays, I guess few years ago, they made a documentary of General Magic, so that's how everyone knows it now. It's the reason I think the documentary was successful is the sort of lifetime of General Magic followed a theatrical thing. It had the redemption part at the end. Otherwise, that documentary would have been too sad to create. But it turns out that General Magic failed, but the young team we put together achieved the dreams of General Magic in both iPhone and Android. We had both Tony Fidel, who was leader of the iPhone hardware, but we also had Andy Rubin, who was the leader of the Android project, both sitting 10 feet from each other. But then also all the rest, the founder of eBay was a General Magic employee. There's probably like the guy in charge of AI at Apple, which is a tough job to have right now, John Giandrea. He's great, but he was a general magician, and many others.
And you mentioned earlier, a lot of people from Apple came. Can you mention some of who they were?
Phil Goldman, Bruce Leak, Steve Perlman, almost the entire HyperCard team, led by Bill, but Dan Winkler was a very key person. He was really the only person besides Bill to work on HyperCard, at least until the very end. Thinking of others, Joanna Hoffman, who's one of my best friends, and I was working with her on all my projects, but she's a brilliant woman, portrayed by Kate Winslet in that Steve Jobs movie. But she was the VP of marketing at General Magic. She was great. Susan Kerr, who I worked with my entire career. It was actually my idea that the Macintosh team needed a full-time artist. And I knew Susan from high school, and that was a great match. She did, and she continues to do tremendous work to this day. But gotta count her in there. Trying to think of some of the others. But quite a few. I would say we probably had, at our peak, something like between 15 and 20 Apple employees.
And you mentioned the innovative software. So I have in my notes, there's the Magic App operating system, and then there's this Telescript messaging software.
Yes. Yeah. It was, just doing the device platform. I'll run you through the thinking on this, but just doing the device platform is an enormous amount of work. You're comparable to the Macintosh, really. Try to do the next generation UI and all that. But the trying to get my thoughts together. There's a business model problem with just the device. It was really clear that the devices, the software that ran the devices had to be very inexpensive to get enough people there. So we were casting around, well, how are we going to make money? If we can't make money off the device platform and that's all we're doing, General Magic wouldn't last very long. But then finally we hit on the idea, have a service. Communications inherently needs a service there because you need something on all the time. You can't really do it just peer-to-peer in your pockets. So we had to have a server, and maybe subscriptions to the server could be our business model. So we went out casting about, what kind of service should be, and we ran into a guy named Jim White, who was introduced to us by his partner, Rich Miller. And he had just what we thought was a incredibly brilliant idea for the service, which is if you looked at communication services, especially at the time, this was before the web solved the problem a different way. You could maybe the device would need the service to be useful, and you could charge a subscription for the service. So, I'm repeating myself. Jim White's great idea was instead, the communication services. It was very difficult to add new features or do the next iteration of, and therefore they couldn't really innovate, or it was just too hard to get new software out to everyone. So Jim's idea was, and this is really inspired by PostScript as much as anything, but if we just made the service in the cloud run a programming language where all the features were just soft, you could just load new things into it, that would be a tremendous solution, and innovation would flourish as anyone thinks of an idea for the service. And this, of course, the software has to be carefully designed so people can't booby trap it in various ways. But Jim came up with this tremendous idea that we thought was more revolutionary than the device that we were making, and General Magic decided, we need to do that. But we had so much on our plate even before the Telescript idea, but ended up hiring just as many people on the Telescript side and more great people. It became central to what we were doing. But one of the places we ran aground was we needed a partner. Just like we had partners on the device, we needed partners to run the service. We ended up getting AT&T involved, who was like the biggest company imaginable in that field. But they brought with them some of their baggage of big company, difficult process and all of that. And I think that's one of the things that ended up sinking us was, General Magic bit off more than it could chew, almost in every direction you could look. But Telescript could have been a major thing. The nascent web was developed at the same time, and that's what what ruled the day. But it was I guess the approach wasn't right, because here we are 25 years later, almost 30 years later, and the world doesn't doesn't work that way. Printers kind of work that way. The great insight of Adobe is you could download the software into that to do the things. But for communications, it's something that could have been, but wasn't.
So I'm trying to understand. So essentially the messaging service itself would have been programmable by the user. Is that correct?
No, not by the user so much. It could be by the user for a technically adept user, but it could be for like companies or people customizing it for different things.
Okay. So developers could modify
Yes.
it and customize it.
Right.
It would have been a platform.
Much like PostScript.
Yeah.
Almost no one writes PostScript by hand. And and then, there's sort of the decline and fall of General Magic, mainly by being in the same general space as the web, but not. Actually, the saddest thing of all, and I take responsibility for this, is I later, at the time, I just didn't have the knowledge or the insight, but there's been the entire history of the communications industry. There's been two different approaches that were warring each other for decades. There were the commercial standards or the open standards. My values and heart and everything about me is on the side of the open standard. We picked the wrong side at General Magic. And kind of tragic. We went with AT&T. Their protocols are by design complex and unwieldy because they kind of wanted to make it hard. They were if you look at things on an ideological spectrum, we're on the opposite side of AT&T. The original Macintosh spirit and what General Magic, what the founders were. We would have wanted the open stuff. And we had that SMTP, the email standard, which is what everyone still uses today. It was, we could have adopted that. Instead, we did something that was at AT&T's urging, much more complex and just not the right thing. I should have been able to see that the open standards were the way to go. If we had done that, we would have been growing up with the web instead of trying to
compete with
killed.
it. Yeah.
And
because it could have become just an extension of the web.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So.
Could you talk about the user interface? What was that like?
Well, you could see it. If we had a Mac here, I have on, of course, in this interview, you can't see it, but it was totally object-oriented from the ground up. We had our own object framework. We had a way, a bit like Objective-C, of just using regular C code to build a nice object framework. And then the sort of key thing on the user interface is it's what I call a spatial metaphor, which the Apple Finder has a little bit, but the idea is if you could make the world behind the screen, the world on the screen, use the metaphors of behind the screen. People already know how to use it, or at least the idea. We'd also did a lot of user testing and refined it through that, but we ended up using, the Macintosh had what's called a desktop, but it wasn't a desktop. General Magic had kind of that same kind of thing, but it looks like a desk. It has all the implements or little things in there. It was that software also. From my experience with Frox, we used a lot of the drag and drop construction, so you could make it really, really easy to not only customize but to create newer kind of apps. It was sort of like HyperCard, I guess. So a little bit of the Frox stuff, a lot of the HyperCard Vision. That was basically General Magic. Magic Cat. General Magic was more than Magic Cat. And I think we succeeded to a large degree. That software is, here it's been 30 years, and that software looks pretty modern today still.
And I think it's really interesting to me, that the company set out to basically make a software platform that multiple hardware vendors could use, rather than making its own hardware.
We made our own hardware, but just as a reference design. The main idea there is you want all the different partners there. It was very difficult managing some of the conflicts of interest between the partners. We wanted to get them aligned. So if they did too much their own thing, it wouldn't really be a platform. So we had to walk a little bit of a tightrope there, because of course each of the partners wanted to put some unique value in it. And so that's one reason we designed the Magic App software to be so customizable, flexible, is because these different parties would be using it with slightly different interests.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm really curious as to, because today, if one were to start a company to do something similar, they would probably make their own hardware rather than make all these partnerships with larger companies. So I think is it because Sony was involved right from the beginning that it had to be this sort of platform model rather than make your own device model?
The make your own device, they just really didn't need General Magic as much. We had, one of the things we had deep experience in is making a new platform that many different possibly competing interests can use. I guess it's what evangelism was on the Mac. We had edge cases where the different partners did just do their own thing and kept it to themselves, especially on the wireless communication side. But we were trying to build a platform that everyone would align to, and it was a reasonable attempt.
I guess maybe my question is, like, the General Magic's model was really more to be like, more be closer to Microsoft rather than Apple, right? Whereas Apple came out with the Newton, did the hardware and the software together. General Magic is doing the software and working with
and we did a reference hardware, but not intended to ship.
Right, and like, why the difference between those two models? Why did General Magic go with that model versus just making the device itself?
We didn't think we had a strong hardware team as we could. We were more about the software, I guess. We did have a hardware team with Wendell Sander and his son Brian, the main designer of the Apple III. Wendell's brilliant, but maybe wasn't up to the leading edge enough. This was at the time the RISC processors. There was at least a big confusion in the industry about it. We probably picked the wrong processor. You didn't use the right one to use, the ARM chip, which is now ubiquitous. We stuck with the Motorola at least at the beginning.
So it was still 68,000 base.
Yeah, 68,000 based. But then later we realized we had to do a new generation with a faster processor. And it never hit the market, but it was something from Silicon Graphics, was it? MIPS, yeah, MIPS. MIPS was the second generation hardware processor for General Magic. I'm still thinking about your question about the Microsoft model, and it would have been a reasonable thing to do, I guess. But
I guess I'm just wondering if, like, was it because at the time it seemed like the Microsoft horizontal model might have more legs in the sense, like, you know, it was sort of at the time that Apple's market share was going down. Microsoft was
ascendant. They were making Apple's market share go down, really.
So it seemed like the logical thing to do at the time, right, is to kind of do that horizontal rather than vertical.
Well, and in some extent it was horizontal. I mean, just, you know, if you just have Magic Cap, that's not that different. We also had the Telescript thing in, which is a complication that the Microsoft platform didn't quite deal with in that way. Microsoft sort of copied General Magic Cap a little bit with the physical metaphor that I know just from reading things, you know, published after the fact. They were trying to do that. It ended up being a fiasco for them, though. It was Microsoft Bob.
So Bob was a copy of Magic Cap?
To some extent. And then, I laugh these days. One of the hottest developments right now are agents. And, you know, that's what Telescript was all about, was making these programmable agents. We called them intelligent agents, although there was no intelligence comparable to what we have today.
But it would have been something that did something for the user.
Yes. Well, the first thing was email. It was, you know, it was programmed in Telescript. It made it really easy to add features. Although we never really got to the point where that would pay off. And then it was wrenching to see it all fall apart. It was, you know, just more than any other reason because of the great team and the camaraderie of the team. And but basically, you know, we got to do a second generation device, but no more after that.
The second generation, when did that come out?
That must have been, let me think, 1997 maybe, 1996. We still had a few partners hanging in there with us. Sony was one of them. And I still have a few devices I got when somebody cleaned out their garage. This was many years ago. They found Sony devices, gave me a box. I had like about 8 of them over the years. Now I think I have 3 of them left. But you can plug them in, they'll still run. Touchscreen, of course, is similar, although we didn't... The industry didn't have the good touchscreen technology at the time. We were a resistive touchscreen, and really the capacitive ones are what you want, so you can have a very light touch. Resistive, you have to press down hard.
And besides Bill, who did you work most closely with?
Well, Phil Goldman, I would say, was the closest. He was one of our earliest hires, tremendous programmer. Unfortunately, he had an untimely death. He died when he was 39 years old. Just a heart attack, even though he had no signs of that beforehand. But for a while, Phil was the main person by far I was working with. Later, Darren Adler, who's now a VP at Apple. Darren's just a sensational programmer, one of the very best ones I ever got a chance to work with. I'd say between Phil and Darren, they were the main people I worked with on Magic App. Susan Kerr, as always, for the graphics, was in there. Susan also, besides the screen work on Magic App, she designed the General Magic logo, which I think was a really nice piece of work.
What was the culture of the company like?
Freewheeling, fun-loving, a lot of pressure, though. The pressure, from the very beginning, we felt this pressure. One of my main failings with General Magic was I didn't take the schedule seriously enough. I was I guess, a little too influenced by the Steve Jobs, perfectionism. But yeah, some of that was Newton, Newton pre-existed before General Magic, but it was a totally different thing than what became the Newton. They had a full-page display, a target price in the thousands of dollars, and they essentially they got to a point and they decided it was failed. They didn't want to move forward with it. Then they sort of looked over their shoulder. They knew about General Magic. Why don't we do what they're doing? Well, the reason you don't want to betray your partners or whatever, but that's kind of what they did behind our back without telling us. It was pretty shocking. But what that competition eventually did was make both companies have ship before they're ready. Newton famously had some user interface glitches that killed it, but Magic App was buggy when it first came out, and if we had had another 6 months, we could have made a considerably better product. But
so how did you feel about the whole competition with Newton?
I felt terrible. I love Steve Capps. I worked closely with him on, it was really that Newton that copied General Magic was really just two people, maybe a third, but Steve Capps, did sort of like 80% of it. I love Capps, worked with him closely. My own sort of private theory is Capps was jealous of Bill, and that's why he didn't join us. We had this one monumental meeting at the very beginning while General Magic was still part of Apple that John Scully attended. It was at Bill's house, but with Capps, trying to convince Capps to work with us. Things would have been different. It's hard to say if that would have made a substantial enough difference to make us succeed. Probably not. I mean, the web was the main thing we needed to get on. But it was emotional and wrenching because we really liked the people who were doing Newton, or at least the main ones that we knew. And it's sad we ended up competing because we're sort of naturally would be aligned. But then in terms of, I don't know. It's I felt sad that Newton collapsed the way it did. Too. I mean, both of us. Apple was on to the future, but we were premature. I guess Apple won the future. Apple, bigger company than Microsoft for the last 6-7 years.
Right. You mentioned earlier that that the CEO of Apple was on the Newton board. Was that John Scully?
Yeah, John Scully was on our board.
Right. I mean,
John,
was on the
not only was on our board, but he was our main champion. We would not have existed as a company if John didn't tell Sony and Motorola both, invest in these guys with us. They're going to be the future. And that's great. But then at some point, John had pressures on him to, from various parties, like, why are we helping General Magic? What's this with the Newton? The Newton had different incarnations, but especially when they were switching to be a handheld, they knew that we were competitive then. And John just didn't know how to deal with it, I think. It's not that he hated us or was trying to hurt us. It was just balancing these different pressures and issues there. But it was clearly bad for both companies.
Right. What was your relationship with him like?
Scully?
Yeah.
I thought he was phony. I was the person who got to demo the Macintosh to him for the first time. I could just see he was marketing himself. I think he's an excellent marketing guy, but he didn't. He was insecure because he wasn't grounded in technology, and so that made him sort of just phony. It didn't come from the heart. Well, that said, I give him full credit for helping make General Magic happen. There's no way it would have happened without his support. And ultimately, you're interviewing the 2025 Andy Hertzfeld. If you were interviewing me from 10 years ago, I would have worse things to say about John Scully. But I guess I'm more mature now, and can see it from his point of view, where I couldn't as much 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
But was it difficult to work with him on the board, or?
Yeah, well, all of our board meetings were theater. They're so tightly scripted because these people really shouldn't have been on the board. There should have been the people directly working with General Magic on the board. We were doing it to get importance to the organizations. And so there's this phony aspect to that a little bit. Like for the board meetings, we had to be very careful about, what we said. A slip up could kill us, basically. And that's not a good environment. Newton ended up getting John fired.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. Is there anything else you want to say about General Magic?
Well, I guess the movie is if you're interested in General Magic, that's probably the first thing you should do watch that movie.
Yeah, I saw it a couple years ago, but it's been a while.
Yeah, it was pretty well done, and it gives the flavor. But it's almost amazing to me that you have this, 90-minute movie about General Magic, and it did not mention Telescript, not once. Whereas it was so much of a part of what we're doing. And so that's a little, I'm not sure why it worked out that way. I guess it was just too much to put in the movie. And then the other thing to say about General Magic, I guess I already said it, is the tremendous quality of the team. And it's not just in terms of the technical stuff. It's in terms of being aligned on the vision and the camaraderie of and just like on the Macintosh, people really devoted their lives to it for some portion of time. And so now I'm proud of the work I did on it, but I'm also cognizant of all the bad decisions I made that really made a difference in its demise. So I kind of grew up from that experience a little bit more. I did another company after that, but it was a tremendous experience, even although it was excruciating as it was falling apart. I'm glad that I did it.
What would you have done differently?
If I had my current mentality, the first thing is I would have been just a maniac about shipping the first version, getting it out to the market as quickly as possible, instead of having all this grandiose stuff about making it easy to customize. Just if we had something leaner, simpler, and ready, then the whole Newton thing would have been diffused, and it actually could have worked. But we took too long, and a lot of that was my poor judgment. What else what was the question again?
Oh, just what you would have done differently.
Yeah, I would have kept the alliance a lot tighter. No competitors, just our three key companies together. That was a beautiful potential vision, and we should have stuck with it. Would have tried to grow slower. We were just a little overweight. Actually, really, when it comes down to it, the most important thing, we shouldn't have done Telescript. That was half our engineering resources, and it wasn't necessary to, maybe it could have come later. It wouldn't have been the same thing, but it was, the one single sentence I would say about the failings of General Magic is we bit off more than we can chew. And in some ways that was immaturity on my part.
Right. So Telescript, so the team was doing Telescript and MagicCap both for the 1.0 release.
That's right.
When it could have just been, the minimum viable product could have just been MagicCap.
Exactly. And maybe we could have saved Telescript for after we were successful or something. But live and learn.
Okay. Well, any last words about General Magic, or should we move on?
No, I guess we covered all of it.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned you started another company that was Eazel.
Eazel, yeah.
Was that directly after, or did you take some time?
I took about a year off in between, but in the early 90s, before the web really kicked in, the computer industry was stagnating to some degree. The Microsoft won, sort of, and Microsoft did not have the users as its main goal. They were predatory, and I was despairing. That's the software industry I grew up with. It looks like it's being choked until the Mozilla announcement, where Netscape was faltering, and they decided to open source release their browser, and all the commotion about that opened my eyes to, hey, open source could be the solution to the stagnating software industry. If the platform, you want to have a shared platform, it aligns it. Everything. It's good for the users. It's good for the developers to have the shared platform. But you don't want the shared platform owned and controlled by a proprietary interest. It's too easy to misuse. It was being misused right in front of us. So I realized that if we could establish free software as the basis for system software, we saved the day. So I decided what I should do next is to do whatever I could to make the free software happen sooner, at the center of the industry. Nowadays it is, almost everyone except Microsoft, but even Microsoft these days with Azure is using Linux. And a new company starting out to do something innovative, you have a big part of your work already done for you. It's a tremendous thing. Anyway, Eazel thought one of the biggest roadblocks to free software getting to be at the center of the industry was ease of use. And this was back, 20 years ago, but especially the free software on the desktop really was way too complex. And so we came up with the idea, Eazel's mission is to make free software easy to use. But when you dig a little bit deeper, the biggest usability problems weren't, the lack of a graphic user interface in some places or whatever. The biggest problem for getting adapted is what I call system management. Adding a new app to your desktop, that should be very simple, but with all the dependencies and the technical things, that was a difficult thing. So we decided to try to solve the system management problem. Now, the other thing about the open software source, if you're giving away your software, you need a way to make money. It's just fundamental is you need a solid business model, or otherwise it's not worth doing. What we realized could solve our problem is to have a system management service. So the way it could have worked, we were shut down before any of this was really battle tested. You could imagine a user paying an extra $2 a month to their ISP to get the system management service that would make it simple, like it is today, really, to add a new application or to help when things go south all the time. Most people who've been in, if you're the technical person in your family, you're doing the system management for everyone you know, practically. If we could automate that and make it easy, that would both get us much further in our mission to make free software easy to use. Thought that was reasonably solid. Eazel failed not because of technical errors or anything, but because we were part of a bubble and didn't know it. Eazel was incredibly easy to get funded initially. Just a cakewalk. The second time we went out for a second round and we couldn't get funded. The climate in the software, this was like 1999? 2000.
So the second round was...
the first round was done in 1999. The second round was done the end of 2000. Right. It was a night and day difference.
Yeah. In the dot-com
the first
bubble.
case, the dot-com bubble exploded, and suddenly, it was much, much harder to get your investors involved. So we just had to close up shop in the very end of 2000, beginning of 2001. And again, wrenching experience. You know, you don't want that. Eazel, at least with General Magic, we succeeded for a little while. Maybe not in the end thing, but you know, having the excitement and all of that with Eazel. It was much quicker, though. At least General Magic, I put over 6 years of my life into. Eazel only 2 years. But again, working with some of the same people from General Magic. I always worked with Susan Kerr, who's always done tremendous work on whatever we've been working on. But Darren Adler was one of the main principals at Eazel, who's also I worked with Mike Boich again, who was our CEO for Radius. Bud Tribble, who's one of my heroes and best manager, maybe the only good manager I've ever had. But Bud was tremendous to work with because he'd just make my software better. You know, I'd show him what I did. He goes, "Why don't you do it that way?" And better than I could have thought. And so it's just great to work with Bud again. He had been one of the co-founders of Next, but then he left Next to go to Sun, and a little bit of a rancorous situation. But then Bud was about done with Sun, and he came over to work on Eazel. But so nice team that it's fun to work with and idealistic to its core. We took some of those Mac people that we had worked with before, but we mixed them with some excellent people working on free software. We adopted the GNOME platform after actually, I mean, I probably shouldn't even talk about this, but we house next door to us we own, and we rent out on Airbnb. And I occasionally we have a property manager who does anything, but I I have to like do the recycling over the weekend. So the guy who's in there now recognized me. He was the guy in charge of Qt. They had a little company that was the competing thing to GNOME. And so it was just surprising to run into this guy. I kind of remembered him, but didn't recognize him, but he recognized me. So we talked about those days, 30 years ago for a while. It's just total coincidence.
Yeah. So competing Unix graphical user interface frameworks.
Yeah, and the big kind of religious war between GNOME and Qt was GNOME was written in straight C, whereas Qt was written in C++. And we had, issues with that developing for GNOME. Basically, the core GNOME team just would not accept C++. We were writing our first version of Nautilus, Eazel's main product, in C++. And we had to change, not quite start over, but to redo things to get GNOME to accept us. And then there were some characters on the GNOME side, like Miguel de Casa. I don't know if you know him, but he's a riot. Very talented programmer, but he's really, really funny. Nat Friedman, who's been in the press a lot lately because he's doing stuff with AI. I guess he's working at Microsoft. He was the other main guy, not a programmer so much as he was their business guy. But
I wrote down Bart Decrem was also.
Oh yeah, Bart was the co-founder. Eazel wouldn't have happened for Bart. I was, I at the time I was done with General Magic and trying to figure out what to do. I got interested in MP3s, so it was one of the main things I was doing back then in between companies. But then Bart, very idealistic. I had worked with him at least a little bit on Plugged In. Bart started sort of resource center in East Palo Alto to get computers to the people who can't afford to go to college and stuff. I was I loved what he was doing. I was a donor. I funded some of it. And then Bart was, when he was done with that, he called me up and think, what can I do and whatever. And I told him how excited I was about open source software. It fit very naturally into Bart's values frame, doing stuff not just to make money, but to help the world. And so we decided to at least explore doing a venture to make Linux easier to use. And then attracted Mike Boich. There ended up being some friction between Mike and Bart, just because Mike was very seasoned with lots of experience. Bart was kind of starry-eyed, more from the nonprofit world. But those were the three founders, me, Bart, and Mike. And then when Bud came, he kind of became a fourth founder, but a little later.
Well, that's fascinating. I met Bart actually later on when he had founded Tapulous.
Tapulous, yeah. Yeah, that was less idealistic, I would say, but it worked for him. Bart's really into music synthesizers now. Last few times I've seen him, he's composing stuff. He might be doing even something else by now.
Well, yeah, like Tapulous ended up becoming more of a music app company. So,
well, they were bought by Disney, right?
I think so. I think that's the case. Yeah.
Bart worked for Disney a couple of years, I think, before he started something else.
Right. Actually, I was kind of fascinated by, you've mentioned, like, even before starting Eazel, you've kind of mentioned that, and I think this kind of goes back to even in the previous interview, you've mentioned sort of that, that spirit of the early Apple II, early PC era, and even when you were working on the Macintosh, you were all really interested in, like, having things be open. And, going to the Hackers Conference in 1984, it was all about openness and kind of sharing your ideas, with the world. And like a lot of the stuff that you're doing for Apple after leaving Apple was kind of more in the spirit of sharing. And I thought that was really interesting because there was this inherent tension between the Macintosh as a closed proprietary system and that spirit of openness that you had, that ultimately kind of has its fruition in Eazel, but there's sort of these seeds of it going back. So I'm kind of really interested in the fact that, like, you had this mentality despite the fact that you're working in these proprietary systems.
Yeah, well, Apple started out with Woz giving away the Apple I board, not any money, just totally for free. And that idealism was very present in Woz and Woz's work. So that predated me at Apple, but it was one of the reasons I fell in love with Apple. Is Woz's values, you could say Apple's values, were fairly tightly aligned with mine. Usually as a project grows, that gets diluted to some degree, especially, in the Silicon Valley environment. A lot of people are coming in to make the quick buck, and that's at odds with, to some degree. Maybe if you're lucky, you can make that align. But that pre-existed the Macintosh. When we started the Mac, that's who we were. To try to, and Steve Jobs, maybe he thought a little differently, but he also wanted, had a big component of what he was doing was trying to make the world a better place, through computers being accessible to everyone. So we're carrying that, but at the same time, there's this duality, and I guess the brutal fact is you're not going to succeed unless you make money. Money's the fuel that it all runs on. So part of it is I can't separate it from me just growing up as a person. It's easier to be an idealist when you haven't done as much. And as I matured, I had a more complex understanding of the different forces and how they're involved, and you have to balance them. If you don't have any kind of business model, your project's going to fail. If you go too much on the proprietary side, your project might fail, depending on what kind of project it is. Some things can tolerate that, others not. So I've always tried to, as I've grown up anyway, maybe not when I was first starting out, but you try to balance those interests. The thing that I'm most attracted to is the spirit behind something. And I've been lucky, and to some extent, I helped make it happen. But all the companies and projects I worked on, including Google, have a core of wanting to make the world a better place, not just wanting to line your pocketbook.
And I guess have you, besides Eazel, have you worked on any open source projects, contributed to open source, or started your own open source projects?
I did a little bit for Nautilus after Eazel folded. I did a little bit of development because I had a couple of ideas that really excited me, and I just did them. But I was a little sour on working on GNOME because of things that happen. It's probably not that appropriate for me. I've never talked about this publicly, and so I'll stay away from it. But we had a falling out with the GNOME team we were working with. They did something, again, I talked about being immature. They were just young kids, pretty much, early 20s, never had done that much commercially, but they were scared of us. And so they weren't forthright with us as things were developing. And that's all I'll say about it. But it made me not want to work on GNOME after it all played out.
So what are your primary areas of responsibility at Eazel?
I was a co-founder. I guess I was the one who had the original idea, so I was sort of the visionary there. But also I was sort of the main user interface designer. Not the icons and stuff, that's Susan, but I was the main interaction designer, let's call it, when user interface designer both has the presentation aspects, but I was the interaction designer. I also, just one of the programmers. I had done a bunch of the programming work. Keeper of the flame, sort of. As we were failing, I tried hard to save it. Someone did me a real favor there. Mike Homer, he was the original Netscape marketing guy. He was one of the early investors in Eazel. And at some point when Eazel was failing, I was going to put in some of my own money to keep it going. And he stopped me from that. And later it was easy to see that if I just would have lost, I was going to put in $500,000 to get us to the next milestone. And it would have just been like lighting your money on fire. So I thank him. He had he had mad cow disease when he was like in his 40s. So, but trying to think and then of course, when you're a founder of a company, co-founder, one of your primary responsibilities is going to be team building. So I did a lot of that too.
And was the culture of Eazel similar to previous companies that?
Yeah, a little bit different. We had this open source foundation that the others didn't. So it was the type of person you got was a little bit different. And then Eazel just failed because we couldn't fundraise, which is a funny way to fail. Because your ideas were never tested. You don't know what roadblock would have killed you if the first one didn't. I don't know what would have happened. At some point, we tried to, when Eazel couldn't get funding, we tried to sell it. And I think open source had flipped around to having a negative reputation or something like that. We weren't able to sell it. And in some ways, I'm glad that we weren't able to sell it, because we might have sold it to someone that didn't share our values. That's what maybe I helped it not sell by telling Mike Boich, I'm not going to work at it if it's, something I don't believe in.
But you mentioned Nautilus continued on.
Yeah, it's still today. If you go add GNOME to your system, you'll be using Nautilus, but it got more and more watered down over the years. Eazel disappeared, so we weren't there to help shepherd it along. But
I guess employees of Eazel could have continued to contribute to the...
Yeah, and some did. I ended up, one of the reasons it's still alive today is they were doing, just as we were failing, they were doing a big new version of GNOME that was not compatible with what came before. And so for GNOME, I knew Eazel was going to disappear. There was no reason Nautilus had to disappear. It's just an open source project. So I ended up, Darren also, when Eazel failed, Darren didn't have a job and he didn't have he needed a job. I ended up paying him to port Nautilus over to the new version of GNOME. Otherwise, it just would have evaporated. Now, that was still a long time ago, but it's still that same version. You could still run Nautilus. I had many innovative ideas to put in the file manager. I didn't mention this, but part of Eazel's strategy to do it, the system management service, the perfect place to put the client for the manager was the file manager, because system management to a large extent is file management. So
so was this like an early version of cloud storage, like Dropbox or something?
We had that, but it wasn't just that.
So the personal cloud file storage, where did that idea come from?
I don't know. It seemed pretty obvious at the time. I mean, it was easy already to mount a disk over the network. It just seemed natural. I was enamored of a lot of the visual UI features I put into Nautilus, but then as the original team backed away from it, new people, it's like a reversion to the mean. It's a little sad, but they just copied Windows because that's what they knew. Whereas I was trying to do something,
a new UI.
Yes. Well, similar, but Like some of the things, like one of the coolest things I thought we did that worked really well was showing, you have the file manager showing previews of the files. I did that for text files. So in small letters, you could say it made it, to me at least, so much more vivid. Back in those days when Eazel was doing it, they weren't even showing you of image files. They weren't showing you just the image for that. A thing I did that wasn't copied, and I don't know why, for it is just being able to change the size of the icons just by dragging on their corners, because not every file is equally important. You want to be able to have a large one as the main thing and all of that. And we had that in there, even though these days nobody does that. I don't know why.
But you're saying like you were able to have like, previews of a file, kind of like the way that macOS has previews.
Yes.
Like the quick look feature. Yeah. So that predates macOS doing it, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Well, what happened was Pavel, a guy named Pavel Sisser, was one of our Eazel people, more from the open source side. I worked closely with him, though, and he's a really good guy. And he spent, after he left Eazel, he hired at Apple, was the main designer of the Finder. And sort of over like 3 years, one by one, he took the good stuff from Nautilus and put it into the Mac, which I thought was great.
And what was the legacy of Eazel then?
Nautilus, I guess. I mean, because it's still around. It's been around for 20 years. But then there really never were system management services like we had envisioned for it. Maybe that idea was off or something. We never got to the point of even trying it. But eventually, Linux got better. I can't give any credit to Eazel. It's just in its natural evolution. But a lot of the clunkiness that we were trying to fix, eventually got fixed. And then I guess I don't know. Yeah, it kind of didn't have that much of a legacy. It's just things haven't moved forward so much, and the Linux desktop, which is essentially what Eazel was really trying to make successful, still isn't really that successful, right? Just everything is, Linux is ubiquitous, but not the desktop platforms for it. As people still, on servers, there's no competition.
And after Eazel ended, a lot of your colleagues went back to Apple.
Yes. Yeah, I had a phone call with Steve where I said, hey, there's 10 great developers or so. They interviewed with them. Don Melton, who was a software manager at Eazel, he was one of the first ones to contact Apple and come back with, say, hey, you guys could work over here. Actually, there was another place, Danger. So some of the Eazel people went to Danger. Some of them went to Apple. Some of them did. Myself, I was still, from my previous adventures, I was well off enough financially that I didn't need to get another job, but I sort of wanted to, for not, I was still too young to stop. And then I did a couple projects, just music projects, just on my own, but I never took them to market. But I'm a music nut, and so that was just labor of love stuff. I actually wrote the music server that I still use to this day, 20-some years later during that period. But then 2005, I used to stay in touch with Steve Jobs, used to maybe 2 times a year by surprise come over to my house. Steve would never, if he wanted to see you, he'd never tell you he was coming because he thought maybe he could learn something more by surprising you or something. But during a time I met with him then, I had figured out, just no one told me, but I figured out they were working on a phone because they had to. They had the huge success with the iPod, and it was clearly you don't want to have 2 things in your pocket, one for playing music and one for taking phone calls. They had to combine. Even Apple had a project that they were doing, not full-hearted, with Motorola. It was awful. But so I knew they'd be having to work on the sort of iPod phone. And I asked Steve, I said, hey, shall I come back to Apple to work on that? And he took it seriously, but he ended up telling me, no, Apple's changed. I don't think you'd like it, basically. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I think I would have, because I had a lot of phone experience from General Magic. I thought that would have been good. But then actually, Andy Rubin was the one who got me into this. But I was helping him on and off a little bit, and he called me up one day and said, how would you like to work at Google? He was selling the original Android project to Google, and he was kind of bundling me in there to make the deal more attractive or something like that. I don't know why exactly, but I started, met a few people at Google, and when I had a clear, this was 2005, so quite some time ago, 20 years ago, but when I found out more about Google, was offered a job at Google way before. I wish I had taken it just from the financial stuff, but I didn't. I stopped because I was confused about something. But then when I got a good sense in 2000, that was 2001, 2005, I got a sense of what they're like, and I fell in love with the spirit. I just thought it was tremendous, even better than Apple was in its early days, kind of just the enthusiasm and joy and just idealism, I guess, made me think, yeah, hey, maybe I do want to work here. I ended up joining it not through the Android project because I thought, well, I don't want to be committed just to doing a phone. I should work on what's best. And so I got a job there and ended up staying there. I took a couple leave of absences, but all together, maybe 8 years. And Google kind of got less googly over time, but was still pretty googly when I left. Now it's even more complex. I'm happy they're doing well now with the AI transition. But Google had also a tremendous set of people, privileged to work with some of them.
Mm-hmm. So who did you work with?
Let's see. I worked pretty closely with Ben Gnomes for a while. Eazel, who's a VP there, was my main manager. He'd put me at projects. I worked with Sergey a bit on what's it called, Google Plus, when it was starting out. He was actually Google manages one of the management tools. I don't even know if they still use it, but they call it OKRs, which is something they got from Intel through Susan Wojcicki there. But basically, at the beginning of each quarter, you write down your goals for the quarter, and you review your goals from the previous quarter, and all of that. And I was shocked when I found out Sergey, who I'd been working with a little bit on the Google Plus, made my project a company OKR without telling me. It was just a little bit bizarre. But,
so that meant that it was
a top priority for the
whole company.
For the whole company, my
Yeah.
prototype of the thing, because they were scared of Facebook during that time period. But I thought, well, boy, it's an honor that my project is important, but you should have told me. Who else did? Yeah, just some of the people you wouldn't know, probably.
And I mean, so talk more about Google Plus, like.
Google just kind of had this wake-up call. It was really part of Larry taking the reins from Eric Schmidt, and he identified that because of Larry is just so brilliant and has incredible insight, but he saw it was inevitable that Facebook would be competing with Google and would have an advantage because they're all about personal information, just exactly what you need to target ads. Google better have a counterweight on that, or they're going to lose their business. So they started kind of a skunkworks or a little small team, working on something that would be the counterweight to Facebook. I was the project I was working for Google at the time was beginning to be finished. I thought maybe...
What was that previous project?
It was something called GUI Times. It was a news platform, next generation news. Google News already existed, but this was intended to solve. The internet was bad for publishers, so let's put together a small team and do prototyping to try to make a thing that would be good for publishers, that was also good user experience and all that. Worked with Joshua Schachter on it, who was the guy who did Delicious, if you remember that. He's great. So it was fun because he's so entertaining. But just me, him, and two other people were working on this GUI Times thing. But then that was beginning to unwind. One of the four people left to go to Twitter. And so I was thinking maybe it's time for me to retire again. And I got to the point of arranging my exit interview when a friend of mine who I work with at General Magic, a tremendous person we didn't mention, is Megan Smith, who became CTO of the United States under Obama. And she's just a wonderful person. I had told her, hey, I'm probably going to leave. And I guess she mentioned it to Urs or Sergey. I'm not sure which it was initially, but Urs came by saying, oh, you're quitting. I said, yeah, today's my last day. I had arranged the exit interview. He said, well, don't, we really need, exceptional UI on this. Wasn't even called Google Plus then, it was called Emerald C. But, we think, you'd like it and whatever. So I went to my exit interview and told him, hey, I'm not exiting. And the first thing I had to do was just figure out what this thing they were talking about was and whatever. But I started writing a prototype. Everyone loved my prototype. So I became one of the early people on Google Plus. And I'm proud of what I wrote there. It was a fun project. It was called the People Editor or something like that. It was how you assign people to interests and groups and stuff. But at the time, the iPhone was top of mind. I was inspired just by all the animations in the iPhone UI, so I put in all kinds of fun animations in my people editor, and it was just fun. I have a favorite one of those, but yeah, it's probably not even worth talking about. But when you deleted a circle, I used a circle metaphor for groups of people. And when you deleted it, circles were like these wheels almost represented. But when you deleted a circle, I made it like fall down off the screen, bounce a few times, and then start rolling off the screen. It was just, I still like that when I think about it. But and then it was the whole Google Plus thing was a crash after, the idea was mobilized, let's get this thing done, we need it now and whatever. So a little bit of pressure is fun. And it was fun to be part of that. Of course, by that time, I'm in my late 50s, working with all these people in their 20s and stuff. But it was fun to work on. And again, Google's always had tremendous employees. I was happy that, some of the other things, I did a major project. Basically, Google, most of the time, it was to let me do what I wanted to do. And I had this idea for a zoomable timeline to display news on. And they said I could work on that with the Google News team. And I built it, and it did. I thought it was a great thing. It was called Google News Timeline. It was up for about 3 or 4 years. It had a user base of maybe 80,000 people would use it at least, once a week. And that's nothing by Google's reckoning. They're not going to be interested in your project unless it has like 80 million people, not 80,000. So they asked me to shut it down after about 3 years. And then after that, I worked on the GUI Times. But I thought that news timeline, you could see pictures of it if you just search for it on Google. And then before that, I did a little bit of work on Picasso, the image, what became Google Photos. Just nothing all that special, but it was okay to work on. What else did I do? A few other little things.
Did you do something for Gmail?
Yeah, just a little UI for picking files, I think. It was in most of the Google apps, including Gmail. Not too much to be proud of, but I'm proud of the timeline. And then the people editor was a fun. After that all ran its course, I worked on Google Glass for just a little bit, just enough to add some features to the thing. But essentially, I was at odds with a couple of people on the team and decided I didn't need that anymore. It was really only for 6 months did I work on Google Glass. And but I was happy that the people editor, even though Google Plus ended up flopping, people editor was well received and really fun to work on. So it seemed like a good one to go out on. And then after that, I did a little bit of consulting for Google. 2 years later, they started this thing called Area 120, which was an internal incubator. It's run by Bradley Horowitz, who I worked with on Google Plus. He asked me if I would help them out. So just as a contractor, I had I was advising these little Team 120 or whatever it was called, not Team 120. Anyway, it had maybe a dozen little teams that could grow up to be real projects. And so they wanted someone to just mentor the teams and brainstorm with them. So I did that for a while. I stopped It was fun, but I didn't get enough usage. I had office hours like 2 days a week, and not enough people came to them to make it worthwhile for me to continue to do it. So that's the last work I did. Now I just putter around and try things out and trying to stay on top of, how transformers work and all that, but not, just for my own edification.
Why do you think Google Plus didn't succeed?
Copied. It's too much like Facebook, basically. Its business purpose and everything was to compete with Facebook, but in order to do that effectively, you have to raise the ante significantly. You got to do something more innovative, and I think it was to get Vic Gundutra was the guy who ran it, and he came from Microsoft and was an expert in being the second mover, copy your competitor, and there was too much of that. They appreciated the circle editor that I did because it was like the one part that didn't copy Facebook. But I think they just weren't innovative enough. That's part of it, but part of it is just the sort of physics of stuff like that. I'm using physics as a metaphor, not real physics, but when a system like that, it's hard to, if someone has a head start, it's hard to compete with them. In other words, the way it was conceived didn't give it enough elbow room to exist with Facebook that already started out with 1,000 times as many users and stuff.
Right, the network effects were working.
Yes, the network effects there was essentially why it didn't work.
Although, Facebook wasn't the first social network. There was
Yes.
MySpace, Friendster before it. So
and Facebook was a little more innovative than Google Plus was in its day, and so they were able to get the lion's share, and then it kind of feeds on itself.
So actually, I want to go back a little bit earlier. So we're done. You also did something for the Open Source Applications Foundation.
Yeah. I ended up being disappointed in that, but the idea was Mitch Kapoor, who I knew Mitch from back in the days before I even worked at Apple. He's a great guy. And he had the idea of how are open source projects, the big ones, governed. And what the idea is, his idea was they should be nonprofits. Like Wikipedia, I guess, is a nonprofit, but ones of that ilk, it's big enough. GNOME, for example, should be like that. Have some governance, have some standard things, and so that's one part of it. But the other part, probably more dear to his heart, is to recreate something he had at Lotus called Agenda, which was kind of a combination. It's what turned into Lotus Notes, but earlier than that. And so he wanted to develop an open source version of that. I thought, well, I don't have anything better to do. This was in the period where I turned down Google, which I should have gone to work at Google in 2001 instead of the Open Source Foundation, but I didn't.
I see. So this was right after Eazel.
Yeah, right after Eazel. And so just with a really small team, 3 or 4 people, we started prototyping this thing for Mitch. And then I left it because it seemed to me Mitch was sort of abandoning the original vision, after, working on it for a year and a half. It just turned into a calendar program, which was just one aspect of what he was trying to do. Meanwhile, I had become, actually one of the things I did during that time after I was doing the initial prototype was I wanted to do software agents, not so much on the intelligence part of them, making them figure out what to do, but what is the UI for presenting the agents to people, whatever. I thought that was a rich area. I had done that at General Magic a bit for Telescript when it was doing the agents, but I asked Mitch if I could work on that for the Open Source Foundation. He said yes. They had one other person was excited about it and did a little, but I saw that it wasn't closely enough related to the core of what Mitch was doing, and he kind of was retrenching a little bit. So I stopped. Well, during the time I was still working on that, I started with my ideas for folklore, and then once I discovered that I could write those anecdotes, in a compelling way, I thought, well, geez, maybe that just worth working on that. So I quit working for OSAF. Oh, and by the way, at OSAF, I was not paid. It was because it was a nonprofit. I thought it was wrong. I just volunteered. Turns out you can't get a tax break on work you just volunteer on, because you could, if it's just an internal project, you could value it any way you wanted. So I couldn't even get a tax break for doing it. But and then OSAF lost steam after that. They basically gave it a shot doing their agenda thing. That's what it was really about. And when that wound down, OSAF wound down. But I had started, I had the idea of historical storytelling, group storytelling. So the idea, like blogs are sort of what everyone was using to publish, but blogs have a big problem in that they're time-oriented. They have a feature where you can pin something at the top, but really you needed something more organized, cross-indexed, and make it so, stories could have a permanent home. Then they had the idea, well, how does it work? Most of the historical writing I've seen, like what I was trying to do, was usually extremely biased to the person writing the story. They're the hero of their story. I wanted it to be able to have multiple heroes of the stories, or even conflicting heroes to the stories. So the idea is, if you could tell everything by short anecdotes that multiple people can use, it could both still have its complete personality, but be amenable to anybody's point of view. And so I thought, well, how do I develop that? I had the energy and time and vision to put it together, but what stories? And then I thought, oh, well, people are interested in the Mac. So I started writing, actually, we have a place in Hawaii. I was over there, very kind of fecund Hawaii, things grow. And I started to see, well, can I write stories? I wrote one, and it just flowed right out of me. And I thought, yeah, in the week I was in Hawaii, I wrote like 8 or 9 of the stories. I thought this could really be something pursuing. So I stopped writing the stories and started writing the software that would support it all. Got enough of that going. I started writing stories again. By the time I quit OSAF, I think I had 15 stories. If you look in the acknowledgments of my book, a lot of the people I worked with at OSAF are acknowledged here because they were my first readers. I was still doing it while OSAF was still going on.
So that was about what year?
That was, let's see, 2000 and... no.
It was before you started Google, which was...
Right, 2005. So it was around 2003 I started writing the first stories. By 2004, I had enough of them. I had like 60 of them. I went and showed it to different people, hey, is this interesting? What should I do with it? I showed it to Tim O'Reilly, who's a very smart guy. And the first thing he said, well, it should be a book. And I thought, at first I was against it being a book because I thought my whole purpose was to make this medium of shared storytelling. But then when I looked into it a little further, I thought, well, no, you could do that as a book. It loses some of its integrity. Books. The problem is one of the reasons I thought it was such a cool thing to do is that links are the currency of the web. And so links that's what allowed shared storytelling and all that. So I was against a book because I thought that its fundamental nature of what I'm trying to do is to make something that a book can't do. But then I played around with a little and I saw, well, you could have links in the stories. In a book, a link is see page 93 instead of click, whatever. But I thought that was maybe good enough. And it was fun doing the book. I'm so glad I did it now. It's just a great little artifact to have. And I never ended up, expanding on the storytelling framework like I thought I would, because for whatever reason, the book took priority over that once I got on that.
But you were able to get at least a few contributions from other people.
Because that was my initial idea, to have the multi-people doing it. I got some of the people I was closest with. I just begged them to write some stories. A few of them didn't do it even after my begging. Like Bill Atkinson was a crucial person, really close to. He let me interview him about the thing, so I have all his detail in there, but I couldn't get him to write a story himself. But then just years later, after the book came out or whatever, by his 40th anniversary at Apple, he was motivated to write a career biography. So I put that as the very first story on the Folklore site. But then a few of the others I had to beg, but I got like 4 or 5 of the best ones are in the book. And then on the website, maybe 20 to 25 were ones just contributed by people I didn't ask to contribute. But I got Bruce Horn, Steve Capps, Susan Kerr, maybe one other to do it. I really tried hard to get Joanna to do it because she's a tremendous writer, but she, for whatever reason, never did.
So it never really took off as like a
as a storytelling framework. I think the world could still use it. I think things like Medium or Substack, they're there, but they didn't have the collaborative aspect that I was enamored with. So maybe there's still room for something like that somewhere.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that like the way that you've told the story is that the idea started off not as to tell the history of the Macintosh, but
That's
actually to build this platform.
Yes. That's right. And it was open. I was going to open source it. I did end up giving the source code out to a few people who just emailed me and asked for it. But it was written in Python. I was fairly new to Python at the time, so if I wanted to open source it for real, it would have taken a significant amount of cleanup. I never got around to it. But anyway, I think it has particular relevance to the Computer History Museum. And so I worked with you, right, to get. Well, a few years ago, it occurred to me that I'm going to be dead, and my folklore stories will evaporate because if I'm not there to maintain it, they'll just get obsolete. And so after thinking about it a little more, I was thinking, well, maybe the Computer History Museum is kind of computer history. Why not have it there? It took me a little while to find you or whatever. At first I was working through Daniel, who I know pretty well from Apple, but he didn't care about the computer history. He just cared about fundraising. And but when I got connected with you and some others, we made it happen, and I'm very happy that it's solid there like that. But what I thought I could do was engage, when I first started engaging with the Computer History Museum, I wanted them to be excited about my storytelling platform. Because if the Computer History Museum is the perfect place for the shared stories, and you can imagine that turning into something formidable. But I don't know, I guess the stories themselves took care of the itch. Although maybe if there was someone who wanted to pursue that under the auspices of the museum or other, I'd certainly at least try to give them what I've learned.
Yeah, that's a different conversation. But
yes.
yeah, but I really thank you for for letting us take care of folklore.org.
Oh, good.
I think it's been. I mean, obviously, it's a tremendous resource, and we obviously love it. And it's
Great.
just we definitely didn't.
Well, it's perfect.
See
it worked because you guys will be here longer than me, I hope.
Yeah. Actually, I want to ask something. A lot of the things that you did earlier, like you were doing a lot of, like mentioning like a lot of like switcher and all those things, sort of adding things to the Mac. So were you a pretty were you participating in the Mac Hack conferences a lot?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I gave a keynote, I think twice. Once as part of a panel, and once just me. I liked the idea that it began at midnight, and they had a exciting group of people. I guess at Ann Arbor, Michigan is where they started, and they had a group of people who taught themselves about the Mac, who were very enthusiastic about it. They ended up writing some software I can't even remember, but that's what one of the things that drew me to Michigan there to talk about it. Those were in the days when, it was kind of fun to give a talk, especially to an audience like that. And then I also thought when you said Mac Hack, I first thought of the Hackers Conference, which is kind of related too. I was involved in organizing that back. It was the fall of 1984, and Stuart Brand was the person behind it. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him. He was great, fun to work with.
Yeah. Was there a connection between the Hackers Conference and Mac Hack, or were they completely separate?
Just the word hack. Stephen Levy wrote the Hackers book. Did a great job, and that's what got the attention of Kevin Kelly and Stuart Brand. They thought, well, Stephen was the one who noticed that there were 3 generations of hackers and whatever, and Kevin Kelly thought, boy, I think these 3 classes of hackers have never met each other, and so why not have a conference where they can meet each other? And so that's what they did. I went up to Stuart's houseboat in Sausalito once a week for, I think, 7 weeks to do the planning for the Hackers Conference. I had like 4 or 5 other hackers, as well as me, to kibitz on what the Hackers Conference should be. I think my main contribution to the Hackers Conference was getting all the right people at Apple to come to it. which I did. They were all there. Not Steve Jobs, but just about everyone else you could want.
And why was that just a one-time thing? Why didn't
the Hackers Conference continued?
Oh, it did continue. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. It was funny. It was conceived as a one-time thing, and then it got picked up by another group about a year and a half later, and they must have had a dozen of them by now. I stopped going to it because the people who picked it up, at least one of them was sort of on a power trip or was something that I didn't like the way he was pursuing it. But then I got told a story by someone who showed that he made me think the Hackers Conference wasn't for hackers anymore. And so I stopped going. But it was this, this story is hardly worth repeating, but a guy told me he came up with a way to download any fonts to the LaserWriter. The LaserWriter had protection, so, you had to license the fonts. You couldn't just do your own. This guy was like, you could tell right away, super, super smart, a little bit crazy. I can't remember his name. He disassembled the LaserWriter and came up with a way to patch it so he could make any fonts. And he showed it to Adobe. Well, no, he wanted to present it at the Hackers Conference, and the Hackers Conference said, no, it's because it's anti-commercial. It's making you get something for free that otherwise you had to pay for. And he had the backing of Adobe or something. So he got canceled. This beautiful hack, that you'd think would be the exact kind of thing you want at the Hackers Conference. They wouldn't support it. They wouldn't let him present it at the Hackers Conference. So I thought, well, I'm on his side, not the Hackers Conference side. And I stopped going. But then I think I went to one or two more later. They were fun.
But how did it change then if it wasn't focused on, was it still?
It got too many corporate sponsors, I think. It wasn't from the ground up like Stewart's Hackers Conference. But it was. People still really liked it. It still had it didn't have its initial purpose of introducing them to each other. That had already happened, but it still was useful as a place for hackers to bring their hacks and show them off. I had just written Switcher the 2 days before the Hackers Conference started. I had gotten my Switcher prototype going. So that was really exciting for me because no one had ever seen it or whatever. I was showing it at the Hackers Conference, and that was really, really fun.
I've seen the video of you showing it at the conference. Yeah, it was
that my wife hates that video because I have a torn sweater.
Is it the enthusiasm? Your enthusiasm is just so palpable.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, I was really excited. That was like the max of my excitement with Switcher to show it off to the hackers.
Okay, so I guess coming back, so you left Google in 2011?
Yeah, actually, 2013. I was done with Google Plus in 2011, but I worked on Glass in 2012 and about a third of 2013 before I quit.
Okay. I actually did want to ask you about, what do you think of Glass, and especially considering it seems like we're revisiting those ideas now.
Yeah. It's well, I think Glass was fairly solidly conceived. It's not where you want to end up with the glasses. Glass just had essentially a tiny little screen in the corner of your eye. And what you really wanted is the whole world to be, through the front of your face, not just looking at a little thing there. So it was a little flawed in that way. And then we were oblivious at the beginning of it to the privacy implications. We didn't have a good solution for that, just a little red light when you were recording, but it didn't have enough of the safeguards for privacy. And so some people hate it, right? Because it lets people spy on you basically in that way. And so, but I think it was a valid stepping stone to what you really want. Like what you really want is, on the flip side of it, is like an Apple Vision Pro, but you want an Apple Vision Pro the size of a Google Glass, which we're not going to get for another 4 or 5 years, I think. But, Facebook on their latest one has got bigger screens, a little bit better than Google Glass. And
they've got sunglasses now.
Yes. Yeah, that are apparently selling pretty good. I got their previous one before the sunglasses just to play around with. It was okay. I'm not much of a gamer, and that's really what it's centered on, I think. But I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have quit when I did with Google Glass. When I got a little disillusioned with it, that's when I quit Google, except for that little consulting I did after that. And maybe I could have just rotated to a different project. But getting old, 72 years old now, still can't believe it. But it was exciting to work. It was a team that was really excited about what they're doing. When they were at its peak, it really seemed like maybe it could be the future. I think with hindsight, that little screen just isn't worth, you can't put enough information on it to make it worth wearing those glasses. But it would have gotten there if they had kept on it. I don't know the dynamic. I was already gone by the time they canceled it. But it's great for a company like Google to try things like that. One thing they did was they, at least from my point of view, they announced it too early, and that set into play a set of forces where you couldn't really wait for it to get it right. You just had to go with what you had. I was lucky that Google let me work on basically whatever I wanted to.
I guess so you felt like at that point it was time for you to retire after
yeah, I wasn't sure. I had retired 3 times before that. So I thought maybe there'd be something, but I was 60 years old when I quit Glass. Thought that was plenty old to be a programmer. I guess by that point, if I was to start another company, I don't think I'd be in a coding role. On the other hand, I think that's what I sort of like the best and do the best. So, it had that conflict. What happened to me, and I think happens to a lot of people when you get older, your memories you just don't have this. I can't focus as much as I used to be able to. Time sort of moves faster, just in general when you get old, but programming that way. So I was, in my heyday, I was a very fast programmer. I could make ththings happen quickly. And then it's kind of slowed down, maybe starting in my 50s. But it just seemed that at some point, you retire. And I don't know, I could have maybe done one more project, and then I play around at home, mainly with just organizing my music and books. Right now I have as big a backlog of fiction to read as I've ever had. I'm reading the new Thomas Pynchon novel, and it's kind of dense and slow going. I've had these other ones pile up afterwards. So got a busy reading schedule for the next 6 months.
Did any of your friends at Apple feel a certain way about you being at Google?
Well, Steve is the main one. He was encouraging, more or less, maybe because he didn't want to hire me or something. But
it's very interesting, though, that he kind of actively dissuaded you from going back to Apple.
Yeah.
But maybe because he knew your personality.
Yeah, he knew me pretty well. He didn't, though. He knew the Andy from the 80s really well. We stayed in touch and stuff, but it didn't really work with him. I did a couple times there during that time period. I was able to suggest improvements to the iPod that they actually did. And at one point, he gave me a gift in repayment for that. So it was kind of interesting. I just had they didn't scroll the right way when they added photos to the iPad. I had a much better way of doing it. And what was cool about that was, I see Steve sporadically, but he came by, I talked to him, I told him I just had a much better way of doing it. He said, send me an email about it. So I did. He forwarded the email to someone, but I got my feature was actually shipping in iPods less than 2 months after I first talked about it to Steve. I thought that was pretty amazing.
How did your relationship with him change?
Well, it's of course very different when I was working directly for him. I thrived. If you've read my book, you'll see that I had what I considered to be a bad manager when I left. Steve could have protected me, but didn't. He kind of tried really, really hard to get me to work at Next for a while. But there my conflict was, Next, boy, that would be a long way out. I thought the main problem with Next is it wasn't really true to its purpose. Steve, what Next's job was for Steve was he wanted to eclipse Apple. That's what he cared about. But that wasn't something you really can tell people. So it was computer for education. Really, the thinking behind it, which he had actually explained to me before he started Next, was he wanted to get 5 years ahead of Apple, which would eventually be the present, and they could win. So the idea was to, education needed a more powerful computer. It would get them ahead of Apple, and eventually, redemption. He wanted revenge for Apple siding with Skull, basically. But I didn't do that. The main reason I didn't do that is Burrell was trying to get me to do the full page display thing. I saw that as something much more easily achieved, just a thing. And so I didn't go to work at Next. He tried one more time after that, after a whole year or two later. I guess they were flailing with their UI, and he really, really wanted me to. But I don't know, it just didn't seem right. And so, but I stayed friends with Steve. Steve's an interesting character, as everyone knows now, and can be very changeable and mercurial and all that. But we resonated it enough. I would never, or not usually, there were a couple exceptions, but I would never kind of just surprise him by visiting him at his house or whatever. But he controlled the tempo of the relationship, and he wanted to talk to me like maybe twice a year visit, and another couple times by phone. And we got along pretty well compared to a lot of people anyway. And I thought, Steve was incredibly great to work with because he really, really wanted to do great things. And but then, he also had a vicious mean streak. And that was just part of the deal with Steve. And it's so unfortunate for the world, the universe, that he died so young. Who knows what things would be like now if he hadn't.
Did you ever get on, it seems like you got along well with him, but it doesn't seem like he ever really turned that mean streak directly on you?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he'd lie, you'd catch him in lies, sometimes lies about things that are important. And then there's some stuff just on the personal life side that I don't want to tell on here, that he kind of was not always trustworthy. But actually, all the Mac team, that original Mac team, almost everyone was exceptional. And Steve was a big part of what made it exceptional. But where I really got at odds with Steve is when he was really mean to Woz on 2 different occasions. I let him know at the time there that, boy, he was just wrong for doing what he did. The stories are in Walter Isaacson's book.
So you mentioned, the Mac team, and I think one of the through lines of your career is that all the companies that you've been involved in, at least up until Google, have, the ones that you've founded or co-founded, have been with members of that original Mac team. So
they're like my family.
Yeah.
Especially Bill Atkinson was the person I learned how to do what I do from, more or less. So he was incredibly important to me. But Susan was my friend from high school, and we just worked on projects together. Every single project I did, up until Google, I had her work on. Joanna, pretty much the same thing. Caps, who, we ended up in conflict over Newton, but I think the world of them. Just a tremendous person to work with. Larry Kenyon also. So just not the whole Mac team, but the Mac software team. But Burrell was my best friend for years. Burrell became schizophrenic in 1989. That was one of the most traumatic events of my life. When all that unfolded, and had a responsibility for trying to help him for many years until he rejected me. I don't see Burrell anymore. But I still own half of the house he lives in. But Brian Howard, another tremendous one, more on the hardware side, but he died of cancer about 15 years ago. Others, like Mike Boich, work closely with him on a few of my projects. He's great. Quite a few of them. And in fact, by default now, anyone who was on the early Apple, is someone I'm going to like spending time with. Like what we did with Chris and Randy, Dan. That was fun. And I love all those people.
It's great to revisit these relationships. Let's see. I think we've covered all of them. So besides the Macintosh, I think you've already answered this question, but what are you most proud of in your career?
I don't know. There are littler things and bigger things. Of the littler things, I'd say the quicker draw, just because I shouldn't have been able to do that, and I did, and it was amazing, but bounded in time and whatever. So just a great little project. But in the bigger picture, I would say General Magic, just because I was, close to the steering wheel of that one. And it was the team we brought together was amazing, and it did have an impact on the world, although indirectly, not the way we wanted it to. But by far, just my role on the Macintosh that's the thing that really mattered. And looking back, a dozen, tens of decades from now, that's the only one that matters compared to anything else. But all of my projects, really, as I'm in the heat and middle of putting them together, I would say that's what I like the best. Bill and I always used to say in the General Magic days is General Magic will be the thing we're remembered for, not the Macintosh. But it's because we were in the middle of it, and so you're more enamored of it.
And how do you what's your view on how the Macintosh has sort of developed over time?
I think they've done an amazing job at keeping it on the leading edge, keeping it viable. Right now, today, if you want to buy a personal computer, there's nothing that competes with the Mac, really. They've done a good job, being steward of it. It's amazing that we've flourished after 3 processor changes, 4, I think, if you count everything. There's 68,000, the PowerPC, then Intel, then ARM. 4, I guess, forced 3 changes. And it's a very difficult thing to do. No one has ever done it besides Apple. And it's especially the latest turn of it. It's amazing. They're ahead of the industry by years with the ARM stuff. That's A+ they get on processor change attempts. The UI's gone downhill. Unfortunately, I still follow it closely and use, the latest. And all the time, especially in this latest one, which is I've only really been using. I usually don't use the betas unless there's some particular thing, but I'll always load it as soon as it's officially released. I noticed quite a few just user interface blunders that wouldn't have been released, 10 or 20 years ago. So they're slipping in that way. Hardware-wise, well, all of the hardware really is the system on a chip, and as I said, that's just off the charts successful. So that's great. In terms of the most important thing is innovating the new platforms. The Apple Vision Pro is sort of the flagship for that. I think it's a little bit troubled right now, only in that it's too big and bulky to use comfortably, but you have no choice but for that. I think they'll be able to make some, they're doing a smart thing, having that, planting the seeds for all the applications when they get the real thing, which will be more like a pair of glasses. But just showing that, the Apple Vision Pro is a demonstration that Apple is still Apple. They can innovate ahead of the curve and whatever. I feel pretty good about Tim Cook, although he doesn't know me at all. I ran into him in a restaurant once. It's already 4 or 5 years ago, and I couldn't, I thought about I shouldn't bother him, but then I thought I'd walk up to him and say, hey, you don't know me, but I worked on the Mac. I'm a friend of Steve's. And he looked at me like I was from some other planet, like didn't even say anything. And then he got up and went to the bathroom. He didn't want to talk to me. I don't know why. I told Bud that. I said, I ran into Tim Cook and he didn't really want to talk to me. And Bud said, he doesn't want to talk to me either, even though he was directly working for him. But I think it's a hard thing to do what he did, and he's done a great job. I mean, I read that Apple in China book. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but made me realize that I don't really know Apple as well as I thought I did. There's so much work goes into producing those devices by not by the millions, but by the billions. It's almost insane. But that's a lot of complexity, and they do it as good as anyone's done it. Now, the thesis of that book is they made a bad mistake that's still unfolding, which is teaching China how to make the great products. Maybe that's, I'm conflicted about that. I don't know what's right, but. And then the next level down of Apple's management, I think, is pretty good these days. They had a couple of bad ones that they evolved past. But I think everyone is well-intentioned. I'm dying to see what Johnny Ive's thing is going to be like.
Oh, with the OpenAI?
With what's his name?
With Altman?
Yeah. I just, as a thought experiments, thinking, they say it doesn't have a screen. If it doesn't have a screen, how does it work? And in my thinking, when I really think it down, is, well, maybe they mean it just has a tiny screen. And I could see how that could work. But if you don't have a way of visually feeding back, it's really hard to figure out how it's going to work. I mean, no one asked me to, so I don't know. But it is fascinating. I think Johnny Ive is myself, although I don't know him personally, but he's a little bit overrated in there, or at least Apple's design values were way over too extreme on the visual design rather than the interaction design. Really, ultimately, when it comes down to it, the visual design is more showy, but the interaction design is what makes it easy to use. And Johnny Ive was more on the visual side, I guess. But yeah, I'm surprised I've never even met him. But,
where do you think? What's your view of the state of the industry today?
AI mad, the raging AI bubble is the state of it today. There's going to be a major collapse. Seems obvious. I'm kind of amazed just in terms of the U.S. The U.S. you'd think would collapse with the MAGA and Trump and stuff. Things are in the worst shape of my lifetime, and just in terms of the general politics of the U.S. It's crazy. But in terms of the Mac, I think they're in pretty good shape. They have a chance, though, of losing the seat that they've been in for decades from the Mac, of being the UI leader of the industry. Everything's up for grabs because of the AI. If you think about it, the basic user interface has to change completely. We're in the middle of the transition. No one has done it right yet, but someone will. I'm sure many people are trying to. But so we're in a funny place in the industry. Also, the compensation stuff that you read about, that's totally nuts. Someone's getting, essentially an AI researcher, an academic is getting like $1 billion a year or something like that. not only is it not sustainable, it's embarrassing. You think that what's going on? I don't have any insight into it, but it's part of what the industry's like. Is you got a company laying off like 1,000 people and hiring a new person that you're paying $150 million a year to. That seems wrong, but I don't know. And then, the original idealism of the personal computer industry, or even just computers themselves and what they can do, has curdled a little bit in that, with the Mac, we thought the best thing we could possibly do is get a computer that's easy to use on someone's desk or even in their pocket. That was a tremendous goal, and I thought it was all positive. But just in the last couple of years, I've come to see that this screen addiction, kids not looking up from their cell phones during dinner, all that kind of stuff. We overshot the mark a little bit. Is we made them easy to use, but a little too addictive. I mean, it's mainly the games, but it's other stuff too. And I think the industry is going to learn how to balance that out. Maybe that's what Johnny Ive's project, the keystone of it, could be that. That's one of the things, certainly, why the only reason not to have the screen is because people stare at the screen too much. So I would say right now the industry's in transition. There's the incredible bubble is going to backfire at some point. Even like the best of the companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, it's hard to see them having a good path to solid, business success. But someone, a few will. I think Google's in great shape. They always are. That was one of the things Urs told me when I first started working with them. We'd always end up talking about Apple, the future of Apple, because he was interested in that, and of course I am, whatever. And he told me 10 years ago, he said, well, Apple's going to fall off their horse when UI becomes AI. Google was very much aware of that, decades ago. And that's really true, is the graphical user interface had its day, but now you just can talk to the thing and say anything. That's obviously more easy. One of the main problems in just the graphical user interface UI is the problem, pick one out of 100, pick one out of 1,000. Sometimes you have to do that. You don't have a good way to do that with graphics. Whereas if you're just saying whatever you say to it, that's seamless. And so, but the good part about the graphical UI is at a glance, someone sees what all the possibilities are, but not if speech is your primary interface. It's, there's no place to put the affordances. So I don't know the answer, but I do know it's going to change.
So yeah, you think a combination of screen and voice.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that you can't ditch the screen and have a good user experience. It has to be limited if you're going to ditch the screen. I can see it succeeding in a special, unique use case, but not, especially for when you're standing up or, it's not comfortable to use it graphically. But it's exciting. It's, someone in an interview says, well, it's really exciting times right now. But you think it's always been really exciting times in the industry. That's what makes it great.
Do you think Apple is going to be able to catch up in AI?
Hope so. I don't know though. It's they don't really have to necessarily. They could just partner with, Google, for example. It's in both companies' interests. So they've got to catch up in terms of the AI experience on their platform, but it's not necessarily catching up by doing the same thing, having a large language model or whatever. Apple has the keys to everyone's usage now, and that's worth a lot. But that's why the way they fail is the AI allows the creation of a much bit different and better user interface. So where they are now seems okay. I guess they're reporting their Q4 results in a matter of minutes or something. It's today, I think. Google announced theirs yesterday, and they did fantastic. Almost unbelievable that, just revenue growing 20% for a company that's worth $3 trillion. Wow. Yeah, it's like, great.
Well, what advice would you give to a young person starting in the industry today?
I always used to say, I had a stock answer for that one because everyone asks, and I say, follow your heart. But as now that I'm a curmudgeonly old man, I think things are a little more complicated than that. You can't just follow your heart. So, but I still think, I guess maybe another way of saying that I'd say is just work on things you love. There's enough different things in the world. You may as well work on something that really, really resonates with your own individual spirit. So work on what you love and then work on what matters. If you can get both of those, you're going to be successful and satisfied. If either one of them, it probably isn't enough, at least for me. And then sort of, I've been through the boom and bust cycles and stuff like that. So you need to give some advice about that. I'm not sure exactly but it's kind of, I guess, a cliche that you hear that's probably right is people always overestimate where you are today, but underestimate where you'll be tomorrow. And keep that in mind, for perspective on everything. And then computer industry has a lot of fads, that come and go, and it's, put everything to that test. Is it really solid or not? What you don't want to do is work on startups that fail. That's the worst part of my career, the times that's happened. It really takes a lot out of you, especially if it's a labor of love. You have to shut it down. So just be careful. Different people, but it's really the main thing. It has to be tailored to self-insight, to know yourself, so you can predict what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. I don't know, anything else? Make sure you're having fun. You can go on these death marches like you have to do, but even when you're on the death march, you could play a little song or do something that lifts your spirits. It's not all sludge. And then, the computer industry affects so much now. I'm going to probably be too old to be around, but just a flood of stuff that you could see has already started, like with curing cancer, for example. But a lot of things like that. But then at the same time, I think, Trump's talking about testing nuclear weapons. You see that this morning? Just he's meeting with China, so he's got to intimidate them. He says, I think we're going to start up our nuclear weapons program. Who knows, can the U.S. survive 3 more years of the Republicans? I don't know. That's part of what makes it a funny time right now. How can the stock market be at record highs? Both Apple and Google stocks right now, as we speak, are higher than they've ever been. But with such an uncertain world, it's hard to see. I'm still hanging on to my Apple and Google stock, even though I know there's a bubble that's going to burst. I think maybe they're a little bit outside the bubble because, they're just so well established and so successful. But you can lose it. What happened to like Nokia, for example, is going from the top of the world to the bottom of the world in just a few months because of the iPhone, they were obsoleted. Try to think of other ones like that. I mean, Netscape ended up not having a business model, I guess, but they sure were successful from my point of view at being the father of all the internet stuff. Trying to think what other ones. Microsoft, I'm surprised Microsoft is as successful as they are today. They, Windows is stagnant and all that, but their sales force is what makes them extremely valuable. The enterprise likes to buy stuff, the same stuff as before. Basically, it's hard to get a change. Facebook, I think, is a phony company. I'm not going to say anything good about them. I think, Mark Zuckerberg consciously lies about what he thinks their purpose is, right? They're like Microsoft. They have the values of Microsoft, which isn't necessarily so bad, and they do good stuff, or at least potentially. It's nuts, though, hiring those AI people. They're going to get people at war with each other in Facebook by having all these guys earning $100 million a year. They're going to work together. I don't know. It seems like a little bit flawed to me. I don't know much about, like NVIDIA. Seems I wouldn't buy NVIDIA stock. I think they're not going to maintain their position. I don't know much about them, so I guess that's about all the companies. There should be better. I should have better advice for people.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody joining a large company. It could be anything that they could want to do.
That's right.
But anyway, I mean, that's my last question. Other than, is there anything else that you want to tell us about before we end?
Nope. I think said everything we're saying. So I guess the last thing to say is that I regard myself as extremely lucky that I was in the right place at the right time to do something that mattered. And just that is enough to make my life fulfilling.